few elected constitutionalists we have, and for that I am grateful. So let's give him a big hand and let him
get on. Nice rousing speech, Ron. Didn't see your name on the flyer though. Was wondering how you worked that. Well, luckily I'm going to talk all about the homeless issue all night, so hopefully I'll be able to buffer those rumors. Or anyway, so I'm actually not going to talk much about the homeless issue, Ron. I'm going to talk about pension, CalPERS. But before I do that, first of all, I want to say thank you so much to Bill. Thank you to Mike and everybody else at the Tea Party Patriots for having me out here. Really appreciate it. And it was actually 1 year ago tonight that I was here, right before Election Day, last go around. So I really appreciate you all asking me back. And I'll mention that, uh-oh, that's probably a problem. So I'll mention that Chris Starkey, I want to just say thank you so much of One Eye Blind Media for the good work you do in editing and uploading those videos. It's there's more work to it than it may appear. So I really do appreciate it. And I also want to mention that if anybody has any topics of interest or any questions throughout, you just got to put your paw up. I will stop. I'll take your question. No problem at all. Just make sure it's a good one. All right, just kidding, of course, no bad questions. So, quick 2 seconds of myself as far as who I am and where I'm from. My name is Nate Black. I was raised in Orangevale, not too far from here, near Folsom. And my mom and dad are still down there. And my wife, Becky, lives here in Yuba City with me, South County, with our 3 children. And my wife is a Yuba City native. Well, I want to introduce one person from the audience, if I can, Rhonda. Rhonda Putman is my assistant, auditor controller, and she's over there next to Robert. And can we clap? Rhonda's amazing. Thank you for that. She's a really wonderful assistant auditor controller, great to work with, and it's a pleasure, and I couldn't do it without you, so thank you. And very apropos to be sitting next to Robert. Okay, so let's do a real quick discussion of internal audit. A year ago when I was here before you, we had just gotten it approved by the board. Thank you, board members, for doing that. It was a big campaign promise that I made, and I'm just so pleased that we're now auditing. So what have we done and where are we going? We have audited now my own office, one aspect of my office, accounts payable. We've also audited HR. Some of you, there's a grand jurist, their next grand jurist over here, and maybe some more of you in the audience. A few years ago, grand jury wrote up a really good write-up. I believe it was of the grand jury recommendations. It was accepted, is my understanding, by the board, and but still the problem persisted. And what the problem was is it was an employee benefits trust fund. So what happens is we collect on behalf of the employees, both from their paychecks plus the employer portion, and we put all this money in this trust fund for the employee benefits, primarily for health insurance, right? And then, of course, a few days later, it's a kind of a zero balance fund, or it's supposed to be, so that money clears out and goes to the third-party vendor. Well, what happened was we had some inappropriate, in my opinion, business practices that led to an enormous amount of unreconciled balance. So just for purposes of tonight, it became an $800,000 problem. So what happened is we didn't fix it. And the problem has persisted. And we've mitigated it to some extent, but it really didn't get a full solution. And so, new HR director, Regina Romeo, she and I got together after the audit, the internal audit, and and I'm gonna give her all the credit. She said, yeah, I agree with you, Nate. This reconciliation's been atrocious. We need to work on that, and can you help me? You're the accountant, can you help me? Absolutely. I love that. I love it when the department head who's not an accountant says, hey accountant, you do the accounting. That's awesome. Just like I say, you do my HR, thank you, right? And so she says, but further, Nate, it's not just, let's get the reconciliation. She says, what's the root cause here? So I've become a root cause champion. She was absolutely right. The root cause was poor business practices. And I won't get into what those are. It's not maybe that important, but I'm going to tell you that we're solving those. So solve the core business problem. Also solve the reconciliation nightmare. But actually the reconciliation becomes a lot smaller as you reduce the amount of items that you need to reconcile. So point being is we're attacking it a little differently than we did in the past, and that's producing good benefits. It's also nice that the Auditor Controller's Office is working across departments, and we're working together. It's not an us versus them thing. It's sometimes I think, and maybe what Ron's getting at is sometimes the paper or what you perceive to be going on in the government is fighting over there, and not really. Sometimes you have disagreements, right? We need to be adult enough to be able to have disagreements on an issue and not attack character and not go after the people, right, that are bringing the issues. That is good and healthy. If you don't have that, you have rubber stamping. And I'll never rubber stamp. That's not my role, it's not my job. Whether it is or it isn't, that's not how I perceive it. So I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to be telling you what I think based upon the code. And if you guys don't like it, then don't re-elect me. If you do, I would please very much appreciate your vote. But my point being is this is a tough job. And this job carries with it contention. I am auditing other people's work that they did. And they may not appreciate it. They may not appreciate my judgment that that it didn't work right. It didn't work anyway. So the point being is it's a lot healthier than maybe it looks like from outside. But where there is contention, I believe that's healthy. I think our government needs to be criticized. It needs contention. If it's rubber stamped, your tax dollars are being wasted, is my opinion. So, what else on internal audit? I just want to describe the reason for it from a technical perspective. Internal audit provides services such as, and the reason why I'm going to spend just a moment talking about it is because if you, the population that votes for electeds, if you don't understand the reasoning for an internal audit, it won't live. It needs buy-in. It needs people in the community saying, hey, so what's going on with internal audit lately? What's, have you found anything, or what's the last audit? We need apathy to be dropped off, and we need you to come in and be involved. That's what's going to keep our government moving in a positive direction. So, what does internal audit provide? Well, the objectives are to provide objective and relevant assurance and to contribute to the effectiveness and efficiency of an organization's governance, risk management, and the control process. So all that's to say, it's really important. Number one, out of everything in the internal control world, there's COSA, which is the Council on Sponsoring Organizations. And they came together in the early 2000s and they put together this, what's called an internal control framework. Anyway, the very top number one thing on that is the control environment and the tone at the top. And so the supervisors, in my opinion, set the tone a year ago when they said, you know what, we want internal audit. We want accountability in our departments. It doesn't mean that we think anybody's doing anything bad. It's truly not about that. It's about verifying that nobody's doing anything bad, right? It's trust, but verify. Thank you, Ronald, right? Thank you, Ronald Reagan, President Reagan. So I'm kind of going to keep it short on internal audit, but if there were any questions out there or anything, obviously I'm very happy to receive them. Bob, go ahead.
I do recall.
Bob, if you speak to a mic, will you?
Excuse me, I do recall Matt Conant a long time ago when you were running that you were suggesting a whole bunch of internal auditors running around doing them all at once because it was going to take so long. I don't know if you've been able to magnify your effort in that so that you can get more audits done more quickly if it's really important.
We've got a mic back here.
Matt speaks loud enough.
I really want more auditing. I have 1 vote of 5. You always got to count to 3, and I'm still hoping we're going to get there. Get this back to Nate. Maybe you can elaborate on the timing and how long it will take.
Well, first of all, I want to be very thankful and gracious for the one you've given me. So I'm good with that. And that is, to not have internal audit for 26 years in Sutter County, to go from 0 to 1 is a big deal. Huge deal, so I really appreciate that. To your question, Bob, I don't think the political will is there to hire any more than 1. I've heard that the board, if they were to hire more, that they would want to control the internal auditors. So, or at least some members of the board. So I'm not in favor of that. I'm in favor of accountants leading accountants, not any other situation. So, but that's really for the board to decide. If you guys gave me more, we would do more. But at this point, we've got 19 departments in the county, and we're going to take them one at a time, and we're going to do a little aspect of each. And the idea is we're going to do the riskiest aspect or component of that department. Because if I were to audit from A to Z, that department, it would take the whole year, 1 department. That's not going to, I don't think that's a good use of this internal auditor's time. Elaine?
How are you going to select what department to audit next?
Sure. Well, actually,
Excuse me, we don't speak through the microphone, it doesn't get picked up on the audio.
oh, okay.
Oh.
The question was, how, do you want to ask it, Elaine?
How do you select?
Turn it on.
How do we select what department to audit next?
Yeah, that is done mostly through what's called a risk matrix. We've done a questionnaire with every single department in the county. Not every single department responded, but those that did, we took their responses, standard questionnaire that we put together. We then use those responses to inform this risk assessment analysis, and I'm doing this up, down, left, right thing because I'm trying to tell you in Excel, in a spreadsheet, and we map out all those risks, and then we add them up. And the riskiest department rises to the top. The less risky goes down and becomes an audit later. So it's all about prioritization on these limited resources. Great question. So Elaine, and to go one step further, what we're going to in the future, so we're auditing currently the Sheriff's Department. We just began that audit. We are auditing next development services. Have an idea what we're going to do there, but I won't say. And then after that, we've got 3 more on the schedule. Shoot, I already turned it. General Services Administration, Behavioral Health, and the Assessor's Office. And again, yeah, that's right. And Todd, being from the private sector, knows the value, I think, because he wants you to come in and say, hey, nobody's saying we're perfect. What can we do better? Show me where I can do better. So I appreciate that, Todd. I appreciate that very much. Okay, so any other internal audit? Oh, right here.
Has the $800,000 problem been eliminated?
Well, in part, yes, but the large part hasn't been eliminated, but it's going to be written off. It is, yeah.
What do you mean by written off?
Absorbed and recognized finally as the loss that it has always been.
Why a loss?
Because that's money that the employees should have borne and or the departments at the time,
Oh, I see.
but it was never borne by them because it got kind of thrown into this suspense.
Okay, all right, now I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. It's too late. Now, I will say though, the bulk of the money is largely going back to the departments that it originated. So actually that's not so much a loss, it's more of a timing of when it's recognized. But the part that was the employees that we subsidized, that is lost. But again, that's a business practice or a business process that we're gonna fix and get better. Okay, good. All right, let's move it on to CalPERS. So CalPERS and the unfunded pension liability, to me, is by far the most serious situation in all of local, state, and federal governments. And I think it's an easy statement to make, totally easy. When you sit back and look at the numbers, nothing gets anywhere even close. And let's start at the top and we'll come down. So Social Security and Medicare. Does anybody in here have any idea as to how much unfunded liabilities those two are when you put them together? Today's money, present value? No, federal Social Security, and I'm talking program as a whole, and federal Medicare.
50 trillion.
Well, the actuaries that I've looked at say between 100 and 200 trillion dollars. More wealth in the entire world. You couldn't confiscate all that today. So now we have some time to pay out some of those, right? But the actuaries are saying by 2036, Social Security is belly up. So don't take my word for it, take theirs. They're much smarter than I am. That's the feds. State, California is the largest unfunded pension liability in the country. So we win that on that one. Way to go, California. And then finally, down to Sutter County, we're not much different than most everybody else, especially other CalPERS employers. But what that means is we're not in a real good spot either. We're about 70% funded, about 70 to 72% funded. CalPERS as a whole, 68% funded. What does that mean? Let's talk about that for just a second. What does it mean when I say 70% funded? What it means is if I had enough money today to invest in the market and obtain a rate of return from that investment, right? And we're gonna say that it's a 7% rate of return that I'm gonna get on average, just like CalPERS is saying. If I have that amount of money and I put it in the market and that market gets me that 7% rate of return, at the end of the day, meaning at the end of this plan, after all of the folks that run the plan got all of their payments and all of them passed away, because that's how it works, that amount of money is 100%. So today's dollars, exactly that amount of money into the market, and then it earns interest, dividends, etc., capital gains, and boom, that'll pay for it, 100%. What I'm saying is we've only got about 70% set aside at CalPERS, generating revenue through its earnings. The other 30% is the unfunded pension liability that we're talking about, right? So that 30% represents something like $130 to $150 million. It's a lot. It's a lot of money. Our total entire spend at the county this year is about $280 million. So this liability represents about half our total spend. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. And it eclipses our total salaries and benefits, which is a little over 100 million. So, why am I talking about this? Well, because it's so dang important, and I am so pleased that you all showed up this evening. I really do appreciate it, but I wish that the room was 5 times more people, because we've got to get the message out that this pension apocalypse is coming. And if you don't believe me, pay attention. I'm going to give you some really good information that I think should persuade you to my view. And it's not a viewpoint that I hold because I want to, it's a viewpoint that I hold because you have to. I learned when I got my business valuation credential called ABV, Accredited Business Valuation, which is through the AICPA. I learned quite a bit about risk and employing money in the market and finance. But I also learned that when you go into court, when you go in, so I worked on divorce litigation, so litigation support, doing the financial analysis for folks that are divorcing, right? And what you do when you go into the courtroom, when you're sitting there as the expert, giving your testimony based upon this, that, and the other thing. So husband's business, I gotta value his business so that half of that value can go to wife, right? Well, the concept is advocate, I'll do the other way if you want. Wife's business, half to the husband. There you go. So the idea is you have to be an advocate for your opinion, not for an outcome. And what that means is you let the data steer you. You don't have a preconceived notion as to what it's going to end up at. You just let the data carry you. and all you do is worry about keeping the data clean and correct. So similarly in this, don't advocate for pension apocalypse. You advocate because the numbers are scaring you to that conclusion. So let's talk about some of those scares. And I stole catastrophic from a quotation that I'm going to report to you. So don't think I'm just being a scaremonger here. So from CalPERS's own reports, the funded status of the pension fund, as I told you earlier, resides around 68% today. Where was it 6 years ago? 6 years ago, 83.37%. So in 2011, 83% funded. So we're only about 17% shy from being fully funded, right in the sweet spot. 6 years later, what happened? We're at 68. How do we go from 83 to 68 over the last 5-6 years?
The end of reform.
That's part of it, Bob, is the discount rate. But I'm really trying to get at the market. Why? I thought the market was okay the last 5 years, 6 years. No, full 6 years.
We didn't invest in sin taxes.
Well, that's part of it too. You guys are. I'm stealing my show here. You've been listening. I love it to that radio program. So I'm on it at 8 o'clock Saturday mornings with Andy, Supervisor Andy Vasquez, and we're having a good time. So back to it. Yeah, it's scary. The last 6 years, we dropped our funded status 15%, while at the same time, on average, and I'm just grabbing one indice here, but the S&P 500, it went up 12.9, excuse me, I messed that up. The average rate of return for the S&P 500 was almost 13%, 12.9%. So, and again, I'm saying average. Some years were pretty low. One was 32%. So 12.9% on average rate of return for that 6-year period. Yet CalPERS dipped 15%. Now, I don't know every reason why that occurred. But what I do know is that the fact that we didn't have a recession in the last 6 years kind of scares me. Because if we have a recession in the next 6 years, what does that do to our funded status? Well, yeah. Obviously, it decreases our funded status. At some point, we're at a point of no return. We are the bird, the road runner. We're already off the cliff, right? We just haven't looked down yet. That's what it is. And once we do, we're going to fall. So obviously, I hope that we don't get there. My interest before you is to provide knowledge and information, and then for that to be acted upon. And I do have a couple of ideas or solutions that I think would help mitigate. But what we can't do is nothing. And which is kind of like on the homeless issue. That's kind of a sentiment that's being echoed is, well, we can't do nothing, right? So I'd say the same thing on this pension. We can't do nothing. And what I keep repeating on the radio program is we are only hurting our children and grandchildren. Every time we do nothing or we kick the can down the road, our options become more and more limited. They don't grow. And so if you, so Bob, you asked me earlier, are you going to talk about the Section 150, are you going to talk about the side fund? Yes, I am. So we are doing some things. We're going to talk about that. But let's first set up the situation just a little bit further. So what happens if we drop below 50% funded? 50%. What happens? Good question. This is from an article by Stephen Frank, and this individual's name is Brad Pacheco, and he's a CalPERS deputy executive. So he's a high up at CalPERS. Quote, frankly, if it falls below 50%, it's a hole that's almost impossible to get out of. Brad Pacheco, ... Further. So we needed to inject cash into the system, and that's one of the reasons they lowered the discount rate. That's actually I think, very poorly worded, but that's what he said. The first part is really what I wanted to highlight. 50%, we can't drop below that. Let's talk about one of the reasons why we cannot drop below that. So this year, CalPERS rate of return, anybody out there know what it was back 6/30/17? 11.2. 11.2. The S&P 500 is about 15.5. So S&P beat it out, but let's not get hung up on that. CalPERS 11.2. You know, I'd say give a round of applause, but hold it for a second. What does that mean when you're only 68, 70% funded? It means that rate of return is a lot less than it seems. Yeah, 11.2 rate of return, yield, okay, yield is what we call it. You multiply that by your funded status, because remember earlier, that 30% that we haven't employed in the market that we need to be 100% funded today, it's not generating revenue. It's not generating dividends and interest. So that means that we're not benefiting from it. And so if you want to think about it, this is how I think about it. 11.2, multiply that times about 70% or 68%, and it produces a real yield, a cash yield of 7.62%. So I'm trying to not get too complicated, but what I'm saying is it seemed like they had this great rate of return that far outpaced the discount rate of it's 7.375 if anybody cares right now. Well, actually it only beat it by this much because it was really only 7.62%. So the point being is when you drop below 50%, what that means is the discount rate CalPERS still says is between 7 and 7.5. They're dropping it to 7 over the next couple more years, 7%. Discount rate for everybody, that all I'm saying is yield. Discount rate means the assumed yield into the future. I should probably get it this way. Okay, so that 11% is actually a lot less. So what it means in terms of the 50% funded status is if you drop below 50% funded status, you would have to double that discount rate or the average rate of return. We'd have to achieve 14 or 15% every single year to get back to 100% funded. The only other way is, of course, to contribute more money, which we're all doing too, which the county and jurisdictions all across the state are sending more and more money down to CalPERS. Let's move on. There's some more really scary quotations that I've got for you. Why the depressed returns compared to the market? Why the depressed returns compared to the market? So an actuary told me a few months ago, his name's Ira, well, one of the reasons is that CalPERS doesn't want to bottom out. And so when the market bottoms out, like it did in 2008, 36% loss, S&P 500, that is catastrophic, right? 36% or 30 something, that is a huge drop. CalPERS doesn't want to eat that kind of drop. They don't want that loss. I'm hearing an echo. They want a loss that's quite a bit less. So they're not going to employ their risk quite that deep or quite that heavy. Second, what that also means is they're also not going to enjoy those highs, right? Don't take the lows, but you also don't get the highs. So they kind of want to have a more stable return, right? That's the idea. So that's one reason, and that's perhaps a quite legitimate reason because diversification and risk mitigation is part and parcel or core to investment management. So I get that. But the next few, you're not going to conclude that, I don't think. Divestment. What's divestment? Thank you, that's right. So CalPERS, the board, does everybody know that CalPERS is an independent board? It is not the lawmakers in Sacramento, although there are some selections, the governor picks some, etc. But it's an independent board, right? You think, or supposedly.
And they vote themselves a bonus regardless of how well they do.
Well, wouldn't you? So, yeah, divestment is not investing in something, not because it's illegal, but because it's politically unsavory for your politics. And so some examples of that divestment have been, as Todd said, tobacco,
Gun manufacturers.
gun manufacturers, ammunition,
Other bases of alcohol.
gambling. I'm not sure about alcohol.
Oil.
Iran or Iran, apartheid, South Africa, Keystone XL pipeline, coal. I'm going to read you a quotation right now of CalPERS from August 7th of this year. And we're going to talk about how crazy this is, how crazy it is to do what they're doing, in my opinion. But to finish up with divestment examples, August 7, 2017, CalPERS completed divestment from 14 thermal coal companies in July of 17. Now here, it's frustrating to me. Here is why they state they're divesting from thermal coal. Well, CalPERS offered no analysis of the financial prospects of coal company securities in the future of the agenda material. So CalPERS offered no information, analysis of this divestment from these 14 thermal coal companies to the board. And so to me, that's number one. I don't appreciate that. I want the analysis. I want the information in front of the decision makers too. In the agenda material, CalPERS staff say they engaged with 17 coal companies, 14 of which offer no transformation plans away from coal, and 3 which said they were transforming to a cleaner energy model. So CalPERS said it's remained invested in those 3 and it dropped the other 14. Interestingly, those 3 are all external companies to this country. They're all foreign companies. So XRO Resources in South Africa, Banpu Public Company in Thailand, PT Adaro Energy in Indonesia. So the 14 or so that are in this country, no thank you, because they're going to continue mining coal and then using the, or maybe they're just the processors of the coal. But nevertheless, you get it. They're in the business of using coal to produce energy, and instead they're going to take our California dollars and invest them overseas. This is wrong on many levels, in my opinion. Forget just the domestic versus foreign, but just the divestment itself. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about fossil fuel and coal in just a second, but this is from my parent company, Betty Yee, State Controller, right? As Auditor Controller, I'm an appendage basically of her office. That's sort of fairly true. So, and it's just controller, state controller. It's not a state auditor controller. There is also a state auditor, just in case you care. So here's the quotation from Betty Yee, and I do appreciate her appointment. So don't take offense to my comments here, but quote, "With a fiduciary responsibility to keep retirement benefits funded, I believe full divestment from fossil fuels is not yet feasible. Even as we depend less and less on fossil fuels, the sheer volume of energy and magnitude of pension assets that need to be replaced is still too big." So what she's saying there is, oh yeah, we need to get out of it. It's just a little bit too fast. We need to be a little bit more thoughtful and slow. So our state controller, the CalPERS board, they're all acting politically instead of fiduciarily. And she says it right here, with a fiduciary responsibility. That's the third word in her quotation. And then she immediately talks about political will exceeding the fiduciary. Why? Lawmakers in Sacramento? Fine. CalPERS board? Not fine. They should not be making political decisions at the board level. They literally go to fiduciary training classes. And then they breach it by divesting from legal companies in our country. Why? Why is that okay? So, and by the way, they've lost since 1986, when CalPERS began this divestment protocol with the apartheid state in South Africa. Since then, $8 billion have been lost, they estimate, by divestment. You know, that's a lot of money that could be in the market making money for us. And keeping down the amount of contributions we have to keep raising to send to Sacramento. So those are my quotations. Now, just to clear the air, because Betty Yee, again, no offense, love you, because she says we depend less and less on fossil fuels, I just wanted to describe that coal, oil, and natural gas, 78% of our domestic consumption, 78%. And it's flippant, you know, don't invest in that. And everybody remember, I think it was Stephen Chu, Obama's energy secretary, that said, we need to make it so expensive for coal companies to do business in the country that they'll go out of business. He said, yeah, I remember that, all right? I'm a young guy too, but I remember that, because who in the government has the right to destroy industry like that? You know, that's, man, and then to exacerbate it by not investing in it through your fiduciary responsibility to seek the highest legal return. I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
Hillary would have finished it. Which one did she get in?
Yeah, thank goodness for Donald Trump. So, some of the other reasons why the returns aren't achieving what the market's achieving. Discount rate. Bob, you said it earlier. Discount rate setting and manipulation. So CalPERS goes out and they hire a consultant. They say, hey, come in and tell us over the next 10 years, what do you think we're going to be able to make in the market? And what does that consultant, who's paid a good fee, come back with them at? 6%. You'll be able to achieve 6% on average for the next 10 years. Drop your discount rate to 6%. CalPERS says, that's a little bit too low. That's not what we wanted to go. We're going to go to 7%. So we were at 7.5 when they initiated this with the consultants, and we're going to go just down 50 basis points instead of 150, like the consultants told us. What does that do? What does that mean? Well, what it means is, thank you so much. What it means is we necessarily aren't assuming, well, we're going to have to pay up someday. It's just a matter of when. If you don't properly set your expectation for how much money the assets that you put in the market are going to make, you're either over or underestimating the amount of money we need to contribute, we the employer. And so they've overestimated the amount they're going to make in the market. And so we're not going to contribute what we should be contributing. We're going to contribute less. So the chairman, and it's just amazing, but the chairman is on record admitting 6% is way too low. Our employers, Sutter County, Yuba County, right, they couldn't afford it, and that would cause political outcry at the local level, which would go to Sacramento. They don't want that, so they're going to stair-step it down. I don't want to be stair-stepped. I want to go to what's right, and I want to go there now. And I know that that causes a budget problem, but if we don't deal with it today, it causes a much greater budget problem in the future. I promise you, the numbers don't work any other way. That's how it goes. And look in the past, and it proves our trajectory is terrible. So we need to be sober when we look at these things. We need to be sober and realistic. The last one, this is the nastiest, I guess. Investment fraud. So former CalPERS CEO Federico Buenrostro Jr. sentenced to 4.5 years of time in the Gray Bar Hotel for funneling investment decisions to his buddy, ex-board member and investment manager Alfred Villalobos. Alfred committed suicide in 2015 because of this. And what they did is, Alfred was the investment guy, and the CEO said, oh, hey, I'm going to go ahead and go with your investment advice, right? That isn't necessarily going to produce the highest rate of return for our constituents because I like you, and because you're paying me money and taking me around the world, and you paid for my wedding, in Tahoe, South Tahoe. So thank you for all those things, but they got caught. And by the way, that Alfred guy was also on the board, the CalPERS board before that. So, these are the kinds of folks down there. And it's not to cast everybody in that light, and that's not my intent, but the CEO, a member of the very limited board, not 9 or 11 members, I can't remember at the moment, I think it's 11. So And that means prison, by the way, Gray Bar Hotel. So, for all of you guys, I got that from somebody I really liked who passed away, named Lee Rogers. And he also has another quotation I really like, and he would say, "Never trust a politician; they'll break your heart every time." I don't know what that tells you about me, other than I know about that quotation, and my interest is in proving that wrong. But we'll see. So, I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about closing the pension plan down and what that looks like, but... Yes, sir. Please.
So, I think we just need to cover a few more bases before we move on. So, when I first started to run for this office, the unfunded pension liability was $103 million. By the time the June primary rolled around, about a year later, it was $130 million. Today, a year and a half roughly, it's $150 million, roughly. So, in that same time, the S&P 500 and the whole market grew dramatically. But in some of those years, the return was 2-3%. Can you go maybe
0.61 and then 2.4?
Yeah, and then like 3, right? Something like that.
It was 3% for the 2 years combined.
Oh, 3% for 2 years.
Instead of 15.
I kind of forgot all the numbers.
Yeah,
But
there's
my
your-
point is they can't perform well and don't perform well. And part of the problem is, I think, is what they've divested in. A lot of the stocks they've divested in do very well in downturn economies. And the one thing they talk about, they don't want to have the lows. They've settled for the lows, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank
Maybe
you.
you want to
Thank you for your
elaborate on
comments.
those.
I would only say that my angle and concern on CalPERS is I'm much more concerned about divestment, their discount rate setting, fraud, those kinds of things. How they do in the market, again, outside of the divestment issue, I give them just a little bit more leeway because it's tough. Market's tough, okay? Managing money in a market is tough, especially when you have $340 billion, literally, think about this, folks. CalPERS moves the dial on stock prices. When CalPERS wants to go from here to here, the whole economy or market around where they're going, it changes. They're that large. CalPERS is so massive. Nobody else in this country has the dollars that CalPERS has, at least at the pension fund level. Anyway, so they have a major impact, and they actually say that sometimes they get a lower rate of return because they are so large. It actually slows their ability to be nimble in the market. They're actually very not nimble because of the size. So, I do hope that they have better rates of return into the future, but I would be willing to attack all of the other issues and just hope that those also help the rate of return. In other words, I'm more concerned about them breaching their fiduciary responsibility than how well they do in the market, because a little bit of that's, crapshoot. So, closed plan, I'll be real brief, but say that there is a way to shut down a pension plan in a public sector context. But it's very difficult, and if you're a CalPERS employer, it's all but impossible. So what do I mean by that? Well, they have a provision, a termination provision in the CalPERS contract that, I mean, they're brilliant for doing it, but it basically handcuffs you. What it does is, in short, I'm going to be really quick on this, so if you ever want to talk more about it, always happy to, but in short, what they do is they say, hey, you've got your money in this big investment pool, the one that I keep talking about, 7%, 7.5%, that's exposed to shares of stock, and things, equities is what I mean. But when you close your plan, when you say, hey, so Marysville a week and a half ago, met with a CalPERS attorney, an expert in CalPERS, and had a conversation about it. Love to hear about that, by the way. And I think if I read the article right, City of Marysville decided at this point we're going to hold off on any big decisions related to our pension. What they learned from that expert attorney is as follows. The money that is put into that pool CalPERS says, oh, you're going to terminate? Okay, we're going to take that out of there with everybody else's money. We're going to take your part out, and we're going to put it over here in this closed plan, this termination plan. And that money only gets invested in treasury bills, which they call risk-free. And the idea is, when you close your plan, you're no longer giving us money except for the termination fee money. Everything after that, it's done. Either you pony up, or you go way of City of Loyalton. Everybody familiar with City of Loyalton? Not too far from here. They only have, what, 17 or something, 15 employees or ex-employees. But they got 60% of their pension cut. Boom, gone. So I was getting $1,000, now I'm getting $400, that kind of thing. Wow, one second, Bob. So, ooh, that's tough. If the City of Loyalton could pony up the balance, that wouldn't have happened, but the city couldn't, just like we couldn't. So if Sutter County were to overnight say, hey, we're going to kind of go the way of City of San Diego. That's a shining example of how you can do it right. City of San Diego, they're not a CalPERS employer. And so they didn't have this termination clause. They're their own system. So what they said is, you know what, for new employees, we're no longer going to do pension. I'm already an employee, I get to continue my pension with City of San Diego. But new hires, you're going to go into a 401k style plan. And the city is going to make a matching contribution, great. The UC system did that as well. I talked about this on the radio. And they've had almost 30% success rate with new hires. That is around 30% of the new hires, millennials oftentimes, they're totally fine with 401ks, myself included, totally fine with it. I don't want the pension for two reasons. One, it ain't going to be there when I'm ready to take it because of you all. And two, no offense, but it's all going to be gone. It's all going to be gone. Trust me. Social Security is going to be gone by 2036, they say. It may even be sooner. But I don't want it for that reason, because I'm paying basically for current retirees, which is a Ponzi scheme. And it's exactly what it is. If you're taking in money today from my contributions and you're paying folks that are already retired with that same money, that's a Ponzi scheme. That's not how the money is supposed to work. They are supposed to have paid for their own retirement when they were working. Right? So we've got to get away from the Ponzi schemes. I know they're tough words, but it's true. It's getting that bad. So let me finish up this closing idea. So if Sutter County were to close, we'd go from 130 to 150 million, which we're at today. I don't know what it is because it's hard to get exact. There's always a lag in terms of the CalPERS reporting, but it's somewhere in that area. That would basically go up 3.5 times. So it would be about a $500 million liability overnight. Wow. And Sutter County can't pay that. And there's no way. There's no chance. So if that became the case, that would mean we would have our pension cut if the board were to make that action, which they never will, I'm just saying, by about 50%. So every retiree would get half, basically, what they were expecting, both current and future. That's just how it would work. I'm only describing how. I'm not a supervisor, I don't have a vote. I'm just telling you how it would work. Now, what can we do to help mitigate that or fix it? There's actually a bill, in last session, the session just closed a couple months ago, but there was a bill this year, 2017, that would have done that. SB 681, I've got it right here. It's by Senator Morlock. Senator Morlock is from conservative Orange County. And this is a great bill. And it would largely do what it is we need. All I'm asking for, and I think what Senator Morlock is asking for, is don't take the money out of the more risky pool that is employed in the greater market with stocks and equities, right? Don't take our money out of there and put it over here and just invest in risk-free treasury stocks. Don't do that. I get that it's a closed plan, is what he's saying, but don't compel that movement. Keep it there and compel us to pay up the unfunded today, and that with the assumption that it's going to keep making that rate of return, right? Don't put us in the 2% is the discount rate in this other pool. So you go from 7% to, no, we're only going to make 2% now for perpetuity. 2% on our 300 and something million that's at CalPERS. Well, you can see that 2% is about in between a third and a fourth of 7%. So that's what happens, is the inverse happens to your unfunded pension liability. It triples or quadruples. Okay, Bob, do you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to mention about the Loyalton thing. They couldn't afford to pay the amount that CalPERS wanted to close their plan. And that's why their actual pension was cut, because they couldn't close their plan the way they had liked. They didn't have the money. So I think I understand now what you're saying, that the unfunded portion is 300 million, and that would go become about 3 times that, about somewhere near 500 million to actually literally to close the plan out and get out completely, which of course is impossible for Sutter County.
Yeah, it's about 130 to 150 today, not 3.
Okay.
That's what the liability is, assuming we get a 7 or 7.5% rate of return into perpetuity.
Right. So I would like to see that McClintock, that other plan that you mentioned.
Morlock. It's yours.
Yeah. I would much prefer that approach.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Senator Morlock, by the way, is a CPA. So, hallelujah. That's a little plug for CPAs. Okay. So, I guess I'm trying to get, how much time do I have left? Just so I can.
Another half hour?
Really?
Sure.
Y'all are like, we're good. Enough mention, brother. Anything else? Yes.
Nobody's left.
That's because you closed the door. The doors are locked.
Who's got a question?
I guess I do have one question.
I had a question.
Yeah. This. Thank you.
I do have one question. Let's see. Just a gut feel. Do you have a feel for how far we are from the point of no return, the 50% point at the current rate we're on? And of course, it all depends on how well the market is doing for CalPERS, in spite of their poor performance relative to the S&P 500. So I don't know what that, it looks to me like we only have a few years at the very best. And if the market does turn when we have another recession, because another recession is inevitable, then we're in deep trouble then. So.
Well, let me quickly respond to that. I think that there is some movement, there is some positive going on. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, both at the local level with what we've done here, and then there's a little bit of positive in Sacramento. So CalPERS has, like I said, they have dropped it from 7.5 to 7%. That 50 basis points means that we have to pay more money, more cash down to CalPERS, and then they will invest that into the market. That's actually a good thing. Again, it creates a budgetary problem because we have to pay more money today, but it's a good thing because we got to pay. In fact, we should have paid it 10 years ago, but pay it now so that it can get invested in the market. Everything you do now is going to only create exponential gain and or more options.
So if conditions don't improve and CalPERS doesn't change the way they do business, how long do you project that they will be out of money?
Well, that's really hard. I don't really have an answer to that. You guys both kind of asked similar. I can't navel gaze that well, and also I don't. That's not where I want to go because I want to stay with the facts and. Maybe I'll say this. I'll work on that, and I'll try to develop a time frame to this with some assumptions.
I'm a retired state employee.
Yeah.
I'm not getting very much.
Okay.
I put in every month money to that pension, and I'm not getting very much. So that's why I need to project for the future as to what I need to do.
Right. Well, stay tuned. I'll work on that. Okay. But I will say that slightly Sutter County is doing better in the state. So good for us a little bit, but not for ex-state workers. But it's pretty marginal. Okay. Oh.
change the subject a little bit for a minute. It's pretty obvious to me that you have not signed a non-disclosure agreement. I thank you for that. My question is the CalPERS board paid? And if so, how much is there?
Yeah, they're paid. I don't know how much.
Is it just a mere stipend, or is it good money? Your best guess.
I don't like to guess with
Okay.
numbers, especially. I'm sorry,
Thank
but
you.
I'm pretty certain that they're paid.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I believe I can answer that question in round numbers. I read recently, and I mentioned it earlier, some of these CalPERS board members, especially at the top, are making $500,000, and they recently approved themselves some very significant bonuses in the range of $80,000 to $200,000 a year. And the bad thing about it is that even when they were doing poorly, they still gave themselves bonuses in previous years.
Then I surmise we are not getting our money's worth.
Well, you just added another item to my list. Thank you. Man, I pray that it's not the numbers you just mentioned. Also, I'm glad I didn't estimate, because I wasn't going to estimate those crazy high numbers. Okay, here's an interesting one, especially for a politically active group like the TPP. What does ex-Governor Gray Davis say about SB 400? SB 400 was the bill that was passed in 1999 that elevated the pension rates for the state CHP and state workers. Well, he says now as follows. I'll make sure I get it. Number. Well, darn it. Well, he says that he would not pass it. I think it's on the first page. That he would not sign. Excuse me. He was the governor. He would not have signed it, knowing now what he knows. There we go. If you're asking me, with everything I've learned in the last 17 years, would I have signed SB 400? No, I would not have signed it. So awesome, and I'm glad that he figured that out 16 years later, but it's still sad for us. We're all holding the bag, right? That's how it always is.
Hey, you know why he signed it?
Why?
Because he got elected governor.
Unions?
That's exactly how he got to become governor, by promising the state and county workers that he would give them 100% retirement. And I got something else to say. I don't know what you're doing to the bottom point. All I'm saying is, he got elected because of his promises that he couldn't afford. And you're telling us here tonight that you have a problem. I understand. I'm retired PERS. But I have some friends that are getting over $100,000 a year retirement. How come you don't come up with the idea of cutting some of these $200,000 a year retirees down a little bit? If you want to save the system, why don't you cut these people down? I worked 38 years for the district. I get $2,200 a month from PERS. I'd be willing to give 1%. That's not a lot of money. And I work just as hard as the guy that's getting $110,000 a year. In fact, a lot of them make jokes about it. And I know people personally that are getting that kind of money. And a lot of them move out of state. They're getting $110,000, $200,000 a year retirement from your guys' PERS, and then they even move out of the state. So you need an answer to your problem. The problem is you're going to have to start cutting these people back down.
That's right. Amen.
Well, that's going to happen. If we don't address it, what you just described is going to happen. It's a certainty. Matt?
I don't think people quite realize. So, for example, if you had a zero unfunded pension liability and you decided you didn't want to be part of PERS anymore, you would automatically cut your beneficiaries probably a 20 to 30% cut. That's one thing. because you're going to get 2% instead of the 7.5% return you were promised. The other thing is that I just like to say is we're paying CalPERS money managers every year to manage the money. We're also paying the board. I'm not so sure that we wouldn't be better off, and I realize Nate and I have talked about this before, that how would you do it? But there are S&P 500 funds, there are no-note funds, there are funds that the state could invest in that are foreign funds as well, mixtures of funds where it wouldn't affect it because it's so much, you diversify it and your dollar cost average into those funds, the system would be a lot better run, and I think you'd make a lot more money for CalPERS.
You'd make a fund manager super happy. 340 million coming your way. But
We would do it all in one place.
the actuaries tell me CalPERS actually is a fairly efficient operation because they have so much of our money invested. Yes,
I'd
sir.
like to ask you a quick question.
Okay.
What's the punchline here tonight?
What's the
You're
punchline?
going to be asking us, you're going to ask us to raise the county taxes, sales tax? I mean, what are we going to?
No, sir. Definitely not my interest. I'm not going to ever ask for more taxes or more money from your pocket.
Well, if I remember right, I read, the last time I read the Peel Democrat before I threw it out in the garbage can. I don't read it anymore. But the last time I read an article in the Peel Democrat, they were going to ask the taxpayers of Sutter County a sales tax to prop up PERS. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about that.
Well, it was in the Field Democrat.
I would assume that won't pass, but we'll
So
see.
you're not here tonight asking us
So-
for sales tax to cover PERS' back?
I'm not sure if you know who I am. I'm the Auditor Controller, Sutter County. I'm not on the board. I'm not coming here before you to pitch a political. I'm here to educate on CalPERS unfunded pension liability.
So you're not here to get any solutions? I mean,
No,
how are you going to generate more money?
I actually have solutions, and I'm about to get into a couple more, if you
But
want
it's
to
not
hear.
going to be a local sales tax.
No.
Well, actually, stay tuned. Maybe I'll come up with that. No, it's not going to be a sales tax. I said that. Hold on a sec. Let me take the show back, all right? Too much roundtable. I got a few more things I want to get into. Is that okay, Bob? Okay. So, some of the solutions, okay, they may not be huge, but they're something. And just talking about it, to me, is a solution in a way, or it's the beginning of one. When you don't talk about it, that's when the thing grows. It wasn't until 2 years ago that my betters at GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Board, finally said, hey, you need to recognize an unfunded pension liability as a liability. We never did before that. So it's actually getting better because we're having the conversation. And I'm highlighting that because it was accountants that brought that to you. Yes, it's boards that are now talking about it, but it's accountants that made it happen. We put it on the financial statements, so that starts the conversation. Accountants have value. They add a lot of value. And never mind. So, another real positive that I brought, albeit I passed the baton off to the treasurer tax collector, is we now have what's called a pension rate stabilization fund. It's with an entity called PARS, and that's the Public Agency Retirement Services. It's a private company. We sent $1 million to them. We just sent another $250,000, and we've got 40,000 earnings from last year from that first $1 million. So that puts us at about 1.3 million today. And what that money is it's a Section 115 IRS trust. And you set money inside of it. It's an irrevocable trust. Once the money goes in, it really can't be spent for anything else other than CalPERS pension. Okay? So the board thoughtfully took money out of, say, discretionary spending and said, no, we're going to put some of this aside, and we're going to start this side fund and grow it. And that, to me, is a really smart thing to do because for a few reasons. One, we control that money. The board and Steve Harrah, the treasurer, they invest the money how they want to, so they can be more nimble. So if we see a dip coming in the market, we can maybe adjust to bonds or we can get out of risky equities. But we're not at the behest of CalPERS and their investment scheme. And it's a way to diversify away from CalPERS as well. We're invested a little differently than CalPERS is, right? So the market fluctuations may mitigate each other, right? That's the idea of diversification. So we are working on it, albeit we could do better. We could always do better. There could always be more done. I am working with the Assistant County Administrator right now to develop a more comprehensive introduction to the unfunded pension liability for the board. And we're going to use this as a working document to start the conversation with the board. We talked about it just this morning, or we're continuing the conversation, but we were speaking about it just this morning, and we're going to jointly go before the board and talk about the CalPERS situation. And Steve, the assistant, he's going to probably come at it a little bit more from a budgetary angle. That's what the CIO's office does, they budget. And then I'll come at it probably from a little bit different financial angle. But we're going to do this together, and we've also invested recently in a pension software. And I'm using the term investing very meaningfully here because it is a really neat software. It's from GovInvest, and what they've done is they built this algorithm that allows you to change assumptions. So I want to contribute $1 million into the side fund, or I want to contribute an extra $1 million down to CalPERS, or I want to change the discount rate from 7.5% down to 6%. I want to give raises in the next memorandum of understanding with the unions. I'm not saying give, but I'm saying you're able to put that raise that we're going to do next year, if we did a raise, into the system and run the numbers. And then that helps from a budget and a long-term fiscal standpoint afford it. So we can put numbers into this software now, see what they do, the ramifications or the consequences of it. Can we afford a 3% raise? I'm not doing any, I'm an auditor controller. I'm just for illusory purposes, right? How do we do that 3%? Because we put it into the software and it's too expensive. That's the use of it. That's the benefit of it. So I'm really excited to work with him and to keep the conversation going. A couple more scaries. I just really want to give you these scaries and I'm going to be done. Because we've got to change, I think, the way we just have to be more involved, and we have to keep our politicians more accountable. So I'm going to talk to you just for a moment about Ronald Sealing. In 1999, at the time of SB 400, he was the chief actuary at CalPERS. So he goes before the board and he says, here's 3 different scenarios. Really good, medium, what I expect to happen, and then really bad. Quote, catastrophic. The consequences of the third one would be, quote, fairly catastrophic. Well, that's actually what happened in real life. In other words, from 1999 to today, of those 3 scenarios, which one came to be? The worst one did. So, but here's how it's even more grating than just the fact that the actuary produced that to the board and they still went forward. The warning made no discernible impression on the board, dominated by union leaders and political allies. Quote, this is from Sealing, he's in Texas now. There was no real taxpayer representation in that room. It was all union people. The greed was overwhelming. And yeah, he moved to Dallas and he's getting his retirement state income tax free now. Right. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. You move to Nevada or you move to Washington, and your pension is non-taxable at the state. Okay, so moving forward, one more from the chairman at that time. There's just so much here, but I'll just get right to William Christ. So what's happening here is you have. It's so good. So it's so bad though. Picker is works for State Treasurer Phil Angelides, Michael Picker at the time. Picker suggested the board refrain from pushing for expanded benefits until Sealing, the CalPERS actuary, had come up with best and worst case scenarios. More than the 3 I talked about. Those were very simple. A little bit deeper. Board chairman William Christ, an economics professor at Cal State Stanislaus and former president of the faculty union, interrupted with sarcasm. Quote, I guess the best case for the retirement system is everybody dies tonight, Chris said, meaning the fund wouldn't have to pay any more benefits. Quote, we could go through a modeling exercise where we make all sorts of different assumptions and predictions, but that's really more than I think we can expect our staff to do.
Oh my God.
I know at the time that may not have been quite as egregious as it is today, but now 17, 18 years later, looking back, for him to say, I don't want staff to look into that, can we just pass this? I gotta get home or to the bar. It's a sad thing, because it's totally irresponsible, and that decision has had such massive consequences. I've talked about this on the radio, but a gal who's at the San Gabriel Health and Human Services Consortium, 63% cut they just received. And she and her husband, they live in a trailer, and they're really struggling. So this economics professor not allowing staff to do their job, it's just really immoral. It's really unfortunate. And he should be ashamed of those comments and of his vote, in my opinion. So that's kind of it for that craziness.
Just a minute. I got a question. Is that because there's no accountability?
A little more specific?
Or I should say there's no consequences for having done that?
Yeah, I'm sure he's just fine. Right? I mean, I wouldn't think anything otherwise.
Politicians bear no.
Please.
Okay, so you're talking about ways that Sutter County can make a difference in its debt, its long-term debt.
Yes.
What if the state goes bonkers and does something bad? How are we protected here?
We're not linked to the state's pension system. So now it's not to say that if the state's, so CalPERS is not the state, right? CalPERS is its own quasi-governmental organization, right? Okay. If the state, which is an employer within CalPERS, just as Sutter County is, if the state goes belly up, we'll have consequences because they're so big. But legally and specifically, we are two separate beasts.
Well, I meant the statewide CalPERS compared to what we're doing at the county. Because you're taking action to try to help the county employees.
Gotcha.
But then if the statewide CalPERS doesn't do what it should, could, then what happens?
I would just leave it with and say that that's litigation time. I think that's all there is to that.
You got CalSTRS about it.
If CalPERS as a whole started to go to that 50% funded status level, the conversation is going to be started well before it implodes, because people will wake up as it gets worse, one way or the other.
I thought it might be useful to remind everyone, perhaps even you're probably already aware, the reason we're in this situation now is because of the generous benefits that the county board approved about 15, 20 years ago, where they increased the amount of that an employee may retire with a certain percentage of their pay. In other words, if they were getting 2%, they increased it to 2.5%, and also reduce the number of years that they had to work to get those benefits. And there are 2 supervisors that are still sitting that were approved that, and not the current supervisors that are here tonight.
Yeah, Larry Munger and Jim Whitaker.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So at least I understand. I've been told that legally it's not possible to enforce a change. However, it may be something that the current supervisors can bring up as a negotiation. Say, look, it's in your best interest to reduce that amount rather than suffer a catastrophic cut later on.
It's kind of like the gentleman over here. I agree with him. We address it now, and we might be able to save it. If we don't, it's going to go the way that he describes. And we already have 2 that have done that. City of Loyalton and the San Gabriel Valley Health and Human Services Consortium, we have 2 now that are about to do that. 2 more, I talked about it this weekend. There's a special district in Trinity County, and I can't remember off the top of my head where the other one is, but 2 more. So that'll be 4 total. And these are between 70 and 90% cuts to their pensions, okay? 90. So as soon as a 90% pension cut comes, I think everybody's going to be talking about it across the state, and we should be. I'm going to change gears and kind of wrap it up here and describe why I think financial people should be in office.
Because they're business people.
Well, there's this article here, this is not from that long ago, September 23rd, and it's Michael Bennett introduces bill to eliminate debt ceiling to avoid, quote, manufactured crisis. So I won't read much, because you won't need much to get it. So here's from Senator, I think? Yeah, Senator from Colorado. It's atrocious. Eliminating the debt limit would be a constructive step toward refocusing the priorities of Congress away from partisan squabbles and onto real challenges that people sent us here to address, like fiscal health of our government. So this gentleman, who's a Democrat from Colorado, senator, he says the way to address our fiscal health is through getting rid of the conversation about raising the debt ceiling. In other words, make the debt limit infinite. And that apparently is going to help the fiscal health of our government. It's actually the opposite. The debt limit is actually almost a rubber stamp. It happens every time that it comes up. They squabble. Ted Cruz does some brave stuff, and some others maybe. Senator Lee from Utah. But mostly it's a rubber stamp each time. So even the conversation isn't even all that beneficial. But as I wrote here in my notes, history shows that the debt ceiling conversation hasn't produced much, but it's better than nothing. It's at least talking about it.
At least a conversation.
At least a conversation. Better than nothing. So, okay, finishing up. I want to mention first that I'm going to run for office again, and I would appreciate your support, and I'm really enjoying this job. It's tough at times, but I feel so good about doing it and about the role of it. I think that it's a really important role. I appreciate Robert Stark and everything he's done for our community and the guidance he's given me. It's a really neat thing, and I'm a young person. I'm not as seasoned as a lot of my colleagues, but I think that has in some ways made it even more special because I've been given this opportunity to represent the people in my community. And I was elected at age 30, so amazing to be in this role. It's a total blessing, a total honor, and I love it. So, what if you don't like me, don't vote for me, right? That's what I say. And that's just a lighthearted way of saying I'm just doing the best I can, the way I think it should be done. And I'm not perfect, but just trying to do right by you all, and I hope to prove it. So I want to be that politician that doesn't break your heart. If over the past few years you think that my job has been sufficient and you have the ability, I'd love to get a contribution from you. I'm going to be running next year, and I definitely need resources for that office. I wanted to end with a quotation that I just treasure, and it was given to me by my uncle, who just moved to Texas with my aunt a couple of years ago, smartly. And I love this state. I just love this place. I got 5 generations back on my mom's side to 1848 over in Linda is when my great-great-great-grandfather immigrated here from Ohio. I love this state. It's sad to see it going so poorly, but nevertheless, here's the quotation, and it's by John Adams. I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statues.